It wouldn't surprise me if the Eagles jump in here. And it wouldn't surprise me if they kick the tires on someone like Sony Michel, who was just released by the Miami Dolphins yesterday. Veteran running back, still plenty of tread on the tires because, as we all know, in New England, they don't necessarily use a bell cow. So he spent a lot of his career in a timeshare situation. And both of these guys, whether it's Alexander Mattison or Sony Michel, they both catch the ball out of the backfield, which is kind of a prerequisite to Nick Sirianni's offense. So I think that these are two names that the Eagles are going to be watching.
Good morning, NFC East. I am proud to present Matt Lombardo from Heavy.com, lead NFL writer there, NFL insider, whatever we want to call you today, Matt. How's it going, my friend?
Both titles work great, Jeff. Happy to be here. Good morning. And, certainly with the season right around the corner, a lot of intriguing storylines starting to develop around the NFC East.
Oh, absolutely. But the first one I wanted to mention to you was certain Vikings running back might be traded today. You want to tell me about that?
Yeah, talking to league sources yesterday, Alexander Mattison, one of their running backs out of Minnesota, talking to multiple sources, they told me that the Vikings aren't quote unquote actively shopping Mattison, but they are listening to any and all offers. And there was some reporting out of Minnesota that up to 16 teams had already reached out to the Vikings, kicking the tires. Now, I'm not sure what the value is here. I don't know if they can net anything more than a fourth round pick at most, because as we both know, running back isn't exactly a premium position in the NFL. But I think that the Eagles are a team that, as I reported a couple of times throughout this summer, have been actively shopping for a veteran running back, that, adding an insurance policy on Miles Sanders, given the nagging injuries that plagued him a year ago, given some of the uncertainty about the backs they have on the roster behind Miles Sanders, it wouldn't surprise me if the Eagles jump in here. And it wouldn't surprise me if they kick the tires on someone like Sony Michel, who was just released by the Miami Dolphins yesterday, veteran running back, still plenty of tread on the tires because, as we all know, in New England, they don't necessarily use a bell cow. So he spent a lot of his career in a timeshare situation. And both of these guys, whether it's Alexander Mattison or Sony Michel, they both catch the ball out of the backfield, which is kind of a prerequisite to Nick Sirianni's offense. So I think that these are two names that the Eagles are going to be watching either via the waiver wire or trying to beat the wire by getting in touch with the Vikings.
Now, if you're the Vikings too, I think you would take a fourth round pick for Mattison just because the comp selection, we're going to compensatory picks here, but he's probably going to be worth a third or a fourth because I think he can be a feature back in this league.
No, I agree. And you look at his season last year, caught the ball out of the backfield a little bit. He had something like 10 explosive runs of 10 yards or more. They have their bell cow in Dalvin Cook. And, I spoke to an NFC South player last week who told me that the Vikings are a team to watch in the NFC North. If they could jump up and surprise a team like the Packers, that they love the pieces they have in place there. And Mattison is one of these guys who's kind of the odd man out. But I think you're right. I think that if you look across the league, there are probably 4, 5, 6, 7 teams where he would jump to the top of the depth chart, or at minimum be a handcuff to your starter. And I think the Eagles are in that sort of a situation. And I wouldn't rule out a team like the Commanders, especially after the tragic situation with Brian Robinson over the weekend. Those are two teams that I think could be involved here and definitely be in the mix.
So let's entertain this here. The Eagles get Alexander Mattison, or the Commanders get Alexander Mattison. Where does Mattison's where does he go with the Eagles? How does he fit in? Same with the Commanders.
Yeah, I think with the Eagles, it's a little bit of a different situation than in Washington. I think that the Eagles are still going to give Miles Sanders every opportunity to be the feature back. And I think that behind that offensive line, with improved play from Jalen Hurts, he's a guy that I think if he stays healthy could push for 1,000, 1,200 yards. And Mattison coming in there either in two back sets, or you do some different things, putting one of them in the slot in a 4 wide receiver stack, or both on the field at the same time. I think that's more of a backfield timeshare situation, similar to what we saw in Minnesota. If the Commanders get involved here, we've seen Antonio Gibson kind of tumble down the depth chart, kind of fall out of favor with that coaching staff. And all reports were that, before the incident over the weekend, Brian Robinson was going to be splitting carries or at the top of the depth chart by himself. So I think that if Alexander Mattison winds up in Washington, there's a real chance he's running back week one for the Commanders.
And we mentioned Antonio Gibson. What I've been hearing is the fumbles. The fumbles are the biggest issue with him, but What has caused his stock to drop besides the fumbles?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's the ball security issues. And, I think that they had a lot higher expectations for him than he showed them when he arrived in Washington. But I still think there's a lot of talent there. I think he's a guy that you need to figure out how to use him. You need to get him the ball in space. I think what he did at Memphis, he was, as prolific a receiver as he was a runner. And I just haven't seen that really translate to the NFL in Washington's offense. So I think that he's one of those guys that the talent is there. They just have to figure out the usage, and he needs to figure out how to protect the football.
When we talk Commanders, obviously we're going to discuss Carson Wentz because this is his third team in 3 years. He's going to be the first quarterback ever, I believe, to start for 3 different teams in 3 consecutive years before turning 30. Is this it for him?
I think it's the last shot. I think it's the last stop before you hit onto the train of veteran backup if he wants to go down that road. And I don't know that his ego would allow him to go down that road. And listen, I was in that locker room every day from, his rookie season through the Eagles Super Bowl run. I don't know that he has it in him to be that veteran backup, to be, the next guy who goes from team to team to team as the backup quarterback, the Nick Foles path, if you will. But I think that the Commanders have built a really nice supporting cast around him. I really love the receiving duo of Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. I think they're both really complementary pieces. McLaurin might be one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL. I think the offensive line still has a ways to go, especially after you lose someone like Brandon Scherf. But, the Commanders, to me, are one of these really fascinating teams. They have all this talent on defense in the front seven. They have some really nice weapons. Carson Wentz should be an upgrade over the quarterback situation they had a year ago, but I don't know that it's going to matter. And I don't know that there's much more out of Carson Wentz than what we saw a year ago, especially how it ended in Indianapolis, where all you had to do was go down in week 18 and knock off the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you're going to the postseason, and he had one of the worst games of his career. So I just don't know that Carson Wentz has it in those big moments. I think the rest of the league recognizes that. And I think this is the make or break situation for Carson Wentz as a starting quarterback in the NFL.
You were front and center for Carson Wentz's rise, for his fall. What do you think happened to him? Was it just Nick Foles coming in there, taking over that team and winning the Super Bowl, and everything just fell apart?
I think there's something to that, Jeff. I think that, you started to hear some of the whispers after that Super Bowl run the following year where he was kind of alienated from teammates, that they didn't necessarily that some of the way he carried himself kind of turned some guys off, and maybe it was the religion thing in the locker room and all of that. But I think that bigger picture, I think the injuries derailed him in a lot of ways because he was the MVP of the NFL when he dove for the goal line at the Coliseum in Los Angeles and tore his ACL. He was the MVP that year, and he had the Eagles in the position to go to the Super Bowl. Now, I don't know that run plays out the same with Carson Wentz during the postseason because those 2 games from Nick Foles against Atlanta and Minnesota were among the more impressive quarterback performances we've seen in the postseason in a long time. But you go to the following year where the Eagles, still had both quarterbacks in place. You have the back injury from Carson Wentz, and Nick Foles goes into the postseason again. The following year, you have the concussion in the playoff game against the Seattle Seahawks. I think that the combination of not having the full backing and support of the locker room and the organization, and then the compounding effect of the injuries, I think it took a significant toll. And, I was one of the people who believed that you get him out of that situation where, the last year and a half of his career in Philadelphia, it became obvious. And there were people who told me that, look, this guy doesn't respond to hard coaching. He plays best, and they get the most out of him when they coach him hard and they ride him and they're critical of him and they correct the mistakes. But you get him out of that situation. You get him with Frank Reich. You get him with Jonathan Taylor. You get him behind arguably a top 2 offensive line or better in the NFL. Michael Pittman Jr., some really good wide receivers that, okay, with Frank Reich there, this thing could turn around for Carson Wentz. When that didn't happen, Jeff, that told me that this might be the end of the line in terms of Carson Wentz's chances of ever developing into a top 15 quarterback in the NFL.
So this is what scares me with Carson Wentz because there are times when he does figure it out, and he looks pretty good when he does it. Now he's got an offense where I'm thinking he could put up some numbers again, but overall, you're right, Matt. It just doesn't seem like there's something missing there. What is missing in Washington's offense that maybe Carson Wentz can't succeed?
Yeah, we're going to find out. And we're going to find out that maybe what was missing was the quarterback. And maybe Carson Wentz being in this situation with the weapons around him in this scheme, maybe he's going to maximize that because I think, the offensive line was certainly better both in Philadelphia and in Indianapolis, right? But I don't know that the receiving core that he has in Washington now, I don't know that that's not the best receiving core that he's had around him. And I think that they fit his skill set. And a lot of the reports out of Ashburn, Virginia this summer are that he's developed an instant rapport with Jahan Dotson. And then you have Terry McLaurin, who's a top 10 receiver or better in the NFL on the other side. These are some game-breaking wide receivers. And Carson Wentz is going to have to put it together. But I'm not sure that we're going to find out exactly what's missing unless he elevates his game to that high level, because then we can just continue to point, if he doesn't, to the quarterback being the problem in Washington. And they're just going to have to go back to that well as a rookie quarterback or making another trade for a veteran, something next year if this doesn't work out.
You and I both saw Jahan Dotson the last 3 years at Penn State. We know how good he is, but I feel like he's kind of undervalued, underrated around the league. What do you think the ceiling is for him this year?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that, very underrated going into the draft. I think he has one of the more outrageous catch radiuses that we've seen in this draft class. He certainly is a really smooth route runner. I think he runs routes really similar to somebody like Devonta Smith in Philadelphia. He didn't get really that acclaim coming into the pre-draft process, but obviously I think Washington saw on tape his ability as a big playmaker in the passing game, his route running, his reliable hands. In that scheme, in that offense, if they fall behind a lot and they're throwing a lot in the second half of games, I don't see why he can't be a guy who catches between, I don't even know to throw a number of receptions out there, but produces 850 to 1,000 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns as a rookie. Because I think that it's not just Jahan Dotson. I think that we're seeing, Jeff, around the NFL, whether it's Jamar Chase, whether it is Justin Jefferson, whether it is Devonta Smith or Jalen Waddle, we're seeing rookies arrive at that position more prepared than ever to be immediate high-impact players at the NFL level. And it all goes back to the fact that these kids are all playing basketball in high school in addition to football. The 7-on-7 tournaments are way more competitive than ever in middle school and high school and getting ready to be recruited in college. The spread offenses are here to stay both in the NFL as they are in college. So it's no longer about receivers taking 2-3 years to develop and hit their peak. No, they're hitting their stride immediately year one as rookies. I think Dotson follows in those footsteps. I think he's a guy that could be an 850 to 1,000-yard receiver right out of the chute.
This is kind of an underrated storyline in the division too, and obviously because of the offensive line issues in Dallas. But could you name Dallas's backup quarterback right now?
No, they just cut Ben DiNucci. I know that.
So, okay.
And I'm not sure that I can name their, number 3 receiver in that offense. And I think that, the Cowboys are one of these really fascinating teams because they were built with a dominant offensive line, a dominant running game. I still think the running game is going to be fine with the duo of Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott, maybe in that order this year. But when you lose the production of Amari Cooper and you don't necessarily replace it in the NFL draft in one of the more historic draft classes at the position that we've seen in some time in a long run of great wide receiver positions, I don't think they did enough around Dak Prescott to help elevate him and fix some of the issues in that offense that came home to roost and came home to bite them in that playoff loss to the Niners last year.
Yeah, and for the number 3 wide receiver, I believe it's going to be Jalen Tolbert, but he didn't have that great of a preseason. And again, that might be because Cooper Rush is throwing him the ball, Will Grier's throwing him the ball, Ben DiNucci's throwing him the ball. Do you like his upside with Dak Prescott? Do you think he can't get any worse?
I still wouldn't rule out the Cowboys being one of these teams that shops for wide receivers after the waiver wire. I don't think that the receivers that they carry today after 4 p.m. are going to be the receivers who line up week 1. And I still think that there are names floating out there like a T.Y. Hilton, like an Odell Beckham Jr. perhaps. There are names out there that are high impact, veteran, reliable wide receivers that I think the Cowboys need to kick the tires on. And I wrote in my national column a couple weeks ago speaking to Randy Mueller, who is a contributor at Heavy.com and a former NFL Executive of the Year. And he said point blank, if he were in that general manager seat in Dallas, he'd be shopping for veteran wide receiver help. And I think that's an area, I agree, that the Cowboys need to upgrade after cuts, via trade, something, because I don't know how you go into this season with Tolbert as your number 3 wide receiver. And I like CeeDee Lamb a lot. I think CeeDee Lamb could be a guy who really takes another big step. But I don't think CeeDee Lamb is a guy who can carry that wide receiving core on his own. And I think that you need to surround Dak Prescott with game changers. And I just don't see a collection of game changers right now in Dallas.
Do you think Dallas hit their ceiling last year? Was last year the year for them to actually go to the Super Bowl? And is that window closed?
It's really tough to say, Jeff, because I think the NFC is really wide open, right? I look at the AFC and I can make a legitimate Super Bowl argument for 6, 7, 8 teams. You look at the Chargers, the Chiefs, you look at the Cincinnati Bengals, maybe the Ravens go worst to first. The Raiders are going to be in the mix there. If you tell me that any of those teams go to the Super Bowl, the Buffalo Bills are the most complete team in football, the prohibitive Super Bowl favorites. You tell me any of those 6 or 7 teams go to the Super Bowl, I'm going to say, okay, I believe you. That's very possible. In the NFC, it's really wide open. I mean, you take the Green Bay Packers, you take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then it's everybody else. And I think that the NFC East is still very much a 2-team race between the Cowboys and the Eagles. I think the Eagles are better. I think they have a more complete roster top to bottom, and I think they're deeper. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win the division and make a long playoff run. The biggest issue with the Cowboys right now, Jeff, behind the uncertainty at wide receiver and some of the issues on offense, I don't know that they can overcome the coaching of Mike McCarthy. I think that this is still a very undisciplined football team. You saw the penalties really come home to roost in that playoff loss. You saw some of the questionable decisions, albeit on 4th down, some of the play calling selections that were made late last year. I don't know that the Cowboys are a team that can win because of their head coach. They have to win in spite of their head coach. And I think when you start to hear all of these back channel whispers about Jerry Jones' flirtation with Sean Payton, when he has Mike McCarthy on staff, where there's smoke like that, I think there's, at least a spark of fire. And when you're going into the year not necessarily all in on your head coach, I think that's telling about where you are as a team, where you are as an organization, and how your ceiling is for the upcoming year.
It does feel like an impending divorce, right? Because he said, well, I love Mike McCarthy, but I could do better. It just feels like, just kind of that whole, you're about to divorce your wife because you're dating someone on the side. And I feel like Sean Payton might be that guy.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think that it wouldn't surprise me if the move to step away from the Saints wasn't with one eye towards ultimately winding up either in the TV booth or possibly in Dallas. And I think that could be a situation where you talk about the Super Bowl window being open or closed. It might be closing with Mike McCarthy, but if you put Sean Payton on the sidelines in a year or two, I think the Cowboys are a very dangerous team because I think, again, they have the talent there. The defense is going to be better this year. I love signing Anthony Barr, putting him alongside Micah Parsons, letting Parsons return to the edge, which is his natural position. You saw the impact that he made there last year. I love the secondary with Diggs and some of the other pieces they have on the back end. The Cowboys defense, I think, is going to be the driving force behind their run this season, and it might be what you build around in coming years.
Yeah, and you mentioned the secondary too. Anthony Brown's not a bad player. So I kind of like what they're doing there too. I think their defensive line is the strength of that football team, don't you?
I do, and I think it's really comes down to the front seven. And I think that they're a team that can get frontline pressure. They blitz you relentlessly when they have to. And I look at Dan Quinn. He should have got a head coaching job this past offseason. And I think that he has the talent in place to keep the Cowboys in a lot of games because of their defense. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's a head coach somewhere around the league this coming cycle.
Speaking of those types of coaches, Jonathan Gannon, I did want to bring him up because Eagles fans, to put it nicely, they're lukewarm on him, but I don't think they believe in him. And I've defended him saying he's got more talent this year. But around the league, there's a lot of talk that he could be in line for the next head coaching job. But what does he have to do to get that?
Yeah, I'm more in the latter part of that conversation than the former. I think Jonathan Gannon has the chance to be a head coach next year. And I think that a lot of the Eagles fans' skepticism, I think it's rooted on what they saw out of him a year ago. But, talking to sources around the league about this situation, and I wrote about it a couple weeks ago in the column, it's really hard for a defensive coordinator to arrive in a situation where you've inherited the pieces and you're trying to build your scheme with players who weren't handpicked by you for that scheme. And you look at what they did this year. They bring in Hassan Reddick, who was top 10 in pass rush win rate on ESPN. They draft Jordan Davis. They find insane value in Nakobe Dean. They picked James Bradbury, who is about a year removed from being an all-pro at the cornerback position. They're loaded with playmakers at all three levels now. And the players they drafted in the NFL draft, don't for a second think that Jonathan Gannon didn't have some sort of input, maybe significant input, over Howie Roseman's decision based upon how to use these guys, how they fit the scheme. The free agents they signed in were essentially handpicked by Jonathan Gannon alongside Howie Roseman. So Gannon now has his pieces to run his scheme. And it wouldn't shock me, Jeff, if you look at the Eagles defense at the end of the year and you look up and they're a top 5 or so unit in the NFL and one of the most improved units across the entire league, just based on the fact that Jonathan Gannon has his pieces in place. And if that's the case, he's going to get a job somewhere next year.
When the Eagles signed Jaquaski Tartt in late June, I figured, okay, this can't hurt. If he's bad, you cut him. If not, you just pay him $500,000 guaranteed, right? What happened there? He just never got his foot off the ground.
Yeah, I think that happens, especially when you sign guys late in the offseason. I mean, you saw the same thing in Miami with Sony Michel. He didn't sign until the middle of July, and now he's out on the street after not really getting his footing underneath him offensively in Miami. But for the Eagles, I think the more impactful signing and one of the more underrated additions they've made all offseason is bringing in Kazir White. I mean, you have a veteran presence at inside linebacker with a little bit of scheme familiarity, who's a magnet for the football. And he's going to wear the green dot. He's going to call the system. And I think that having that veteran presence in the middle, I think that's really going to help them significantly on defense.
Do you think Nakobe Dean starts week 1?
I think there's a chance, and he's a guy that does a little bit of everything, right? I mean, you can move him around. You can weaponize him off the edge a little bit. You can put him inside. I think he's a guy that if he flashes, throughout practice and going into the regular season, I don't know that you can keep him off the field.
This is the tough part for me, especially with this division. I don't want to write off the Giants, but I don't think it's going to be a very good year for them. Just look at their roster, and I kind of feel bad for Daniel Jones right now, which is hard for me to do because he's got no one to throw to, Matt. Absolutely no one. Kenny Golladay does make this team, right?
You'd think. I mean, it's kind of cost prohibitive for them to move on from him as a cut. I think they have to eat something like $21 million against the cap this year, which they don't have. And, say what you will about Joe Schoen. I think the Giants have a really bright future because Joe Schoen was so restricted this offseason because they have the second most cap space in the NFL next season behind the Chicago Bears. They were not going to restructure and follow the mistakes of Dave Gettleman, restructuring contracts and pushing money into the following season just to get by this year. They were very diligent about that through free agency. They weren't going to be big spenders. They were going to kind of take their lumps this year. And, they brought in some Band-Aids along the offensive line, John Feliciano at center, Mark Lewinsky at guard. I think they hit a home run with the Evan Neal pick in the NFL draft. I think they now have 2 bookend tackles. But the point here is, I think Kenny Golladay is on this team because they can cut him after this season and get a cost benefit against the cap. And I just don't see Joe Schoen, messing with that cap space they have next year after being so diligent and so restricted in terms of not overspending and not pushing money into next season to try to put a winner on the field this year. Now, obviously, that's going to make it a lot tougher to evaluate Daniel Jones, who I think his days in New York are very numbered. But I think that they're a quarterback away from being a team that can make some noise. I think that you look at Kadarius Toney, he's going to be significantly better this year. I think this scheme really benefits him. Wan'Dale Robinson is a player to watch as a rookie. I think that he's going to really surprise a lot of people. And, talking to sources around the league, Brian Daboll is going to make a concerted effort to get Saquon Barkley the ball in space. It's not just going to be using him as a running back. They showed this a couple times in training camp, but there is a significant plan and a significant part of the offense lining up Saquon Barkley in the slot, using him as a receiver, motioning him out of the slot, using him on wheel routes and such. In a lot of ways, what you saw out of him at Penn State, I think this coaching staff realizes what Joe Judge's staff and Pat Shurmur's staff failed to, is that Saquon Barkley is a dangerous space player. He's not a guy who's going to he's going to hit the home run out of the backfield. But when your offensive line can't open up the running lanes, you're really wasting his talent if you're just going to run him up the A-gap or try to run him off tackle. You need to get him the ball in the open field. I think this offense is going to do that. But overall, I think Saquon Barkley is going to be, better if he stays healthy. I think Kadarius Toney is going to be an impact player. There's a lot of holes on the offense. I think the defense is going to be better this year. I think their secondary is really coming together, and there's a lot of young talent there. But I'm with you. I think this is a team that's more competitive in games, but I don't think they win more than 5 games, 6 games tops this season. But next year, when they have the spending flexibility, when they potentially have another top 10 pick, when you're potentially looking at developing a young rookie quarterback or controlling the veteran quarterback market and dropping into that system with all that talent around him, I think that the Giants are one of these teams that are a year away from being kind of dangerous, but it's going to be pretty ugly and go through some growing pains this year.
Is Saquon Barkley part of that future?
That's the $80 million question, right? Because I think it all depends on what he does this year. If he stays healthy for 17 games and he's one of these 2,000 yards from scrimmage back with 1,200 rushing yards, 800 receiving yards, it's hard to move on from that, right? But the flip side of that coin is you have a GM who understands positional value now. You have a GM who now understands that you don't pay running backs their second contracts. You have a general manager who is taking the long view of how to build a roster, something that his predecessor straddled the line between trying to win now and rebuild simultaneously. We know it doesn't work in this league. I think it's a coin flip whether Saquon Barkley's in a Giants uniform in 2023 or not.
How about Miles Sanders?
That's a tough one. I think the Eagles are another team that they just seem like they have the offensive line in place. It's a top 5 offensive line every year. That I don't think that they need to pay for a Miles Sanders. I think they can dip into the draft and take a running back in round 2 or round 3 again, like they did Miles Sanders in round 2 in 2019. I think they're a team that could move on from their running back and drop a running back there and be just as, if not more productive with that new back than they are with Sanders.
I guess, this is funny, Matt. I'm in the middle of my second show, and I have not mentioned Jalen Hurts once. So I have to mention him now. What are you hearing about Jalen Hurts? What do you think the Eagles think of him? Just overall, what has been the national consensus on?
Yeah, I think it really depends who you talk to, right? I mean, there's sources around the league who say the Eagles are a quarterback away from being a Super Bowl team, and people are just really skeptical that Jalen Hurts can take that next step. But there are other people who think that they're going about this the right way, that they're building the perfect sort of supporting cast and offensive line around him to facilitate him taking a big leap. And that you look at, Kyler Murray's path in Arizona, and you look at kind of his trajectory from surprise number 1 overall pick to kind of inconsistent rookie to all of a sudden top 10 quarterback in the NFL, that could be the type of leap that Jalen Hurts makes this season. I think that's a little bit far-fetched. But I don't know why, with this supporting cast, with this offensive line, in this system, a second year in the same system, which is just huge for Jalen Hurts, I don't see why he can't be a 3,100-yard, 32 touchdown, 10 interception type of player. And if that's the case, the Eagles are going to win a lot of games because that defense is really good too. And if Jalen Hurts makes that kind of leap, you found your quarterback, right? You don't need to go looking for the quarterback next year. And then you have 2 first-round picks to build around him. So that's where I think Howie Roseman has done really a marvelous job in terms of setting the Eagles up here for optionality at the quarterback and in terms of extending this Super Bowl window, if you will. Because if he's the guy, you can build a pretty dynamic team around him with those assets. And if he's not, you're going to be the team that's the leader in the clubhouse for whoever the hot veteran quarterback is this offseason, or to move up and go get one of the top quarterbacks in this draft class. So I think Hurts, if you twist my arm, give me, truth serum, I think he makes the leap because they've done everything to facilitate him doing so.
Is it fair to say his ceiling is Dak Prescott, or can it be higher than that?
I think it could be a little bit higher than that. And I think that the Eagles have done a much better job of building around him than Dallas has in building around Dak Prescott this year. You look at what they had a year ago, and you had Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, not to mention those running backs, not to mention that offensive line. That should have been a Super Bowl team. That team should have gone NFC Championship game at minimum, and they didn't make it there for a lot of reasons. Again, we go back to Mike McCarthy, we go back to the undisciplined, we go back to the penalties. Dak Prescott should have taken them much further than a home wildcard round loss to the San Francisco 49ers. I think Jalen Hurts can be better than that. I think he could. The question for Jalen Hurts, and I've heard this from a number of different places, is can he be the catalyst for the Eagles making the postseason and making a run because of Jalen Hurts? or are they going to make the postseason because he's riding along with the supporting cast? If he's the catalyst, they're going to be able to commit to him long term. But if he's just a guy who's riding the number one running game in the NFL, if he's just a guy benefiting from a great defense, I think the Eagles can do better.
So what about Andre Dillard? I know there's been talk maybe the Eagles trade him. I don't think they should personally, but have you heard anything about if teams have inquired on Dillard?
I haven't heard anything as far as any trade offers being made, and I'm not even sure how strong the interest is around the league. Dillard's a guy that if you can get an asset for him, great. But I don't know that I would mess with offensive line depth. I don't know that, you have this dynamic top 5 or so offensive line in the NFL. Andre Dillard's a really nice veteran backup, a veteran piece. I don't know that you mess with that.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Dillard too, right? If, say, Jordan Mailata would go down week 1, who do you go with? I mean, do you
Right.
you move Lane over? Do you go with Jack Driscoll? I couldn't even tell you who the Eagles would go there. So yeah, you're right. Offensive line depth's key, and you're seeing the situation in Dallas.
For sure. And I think the Eagles saw a glimpse of it a year ago when Brandon Brooks went down. I think that, not having that quality backup to step in and kind of stop the bleeding, I think you need that in the NFL along the offensive line. And the Eagles have done a great job of building their 2 deep along the line for the last half decade. And I just don't see, unless you're getting blown away by some sort of offer, I don't see where moving on from Dillard makes a whole lot of sense.
How do you think Tyler Swift's going to fare? Because I think he's a pretty good run blocker, but pass protection, I don't know if he's ready for that yet.
Yeah, I think time's going to tell. It's a lot different, doing it in college and facing the live ammunition of NFL pass rushes every week. So it's going to be really fascinating to see how that plays out.
Finally, Matt, Kayvon Thibodeaux. I was really high on him going into the draft. I thought he could have been up there with Aiden Hutchinson. I thought New York got such a steal for him, just where he was picked. What are your thoughts on Kayvon Thibodeaux based on what you heard, and what is basically going to be his ceiling for this defense this year?
Yeah, from what I heard and what I saw are kind of 2 different things, right? Because you hear from people around the league, and he's one of the more enigmatic prospects that we've seen in a lot of years, very polarizing. You have general managers who said, I love the explosiveness, I love the ceiling, I love the athleticism, I love the upside. I think this guy can be close to a double-digit sack guy right away or in a year down the line. Then you have other people inside the league who say that, here's somebody who turns it on when he wants to turn it on. Kind of turns a lot of people off in terms of how he carries himself off the field. And kind of the light switch player effect turned off a lot of people inside the league. But, watching him at Giants training camp, I was up there for 2 practices this year. Watching him, he has an explosive first step, has elite bend off the edge. And I think he's one of these foundational building block pieces for the Giants front 7. What happened to him in the preseason is kind of a shame. I think that, it's going to stunt his growth a little bit with that injury, and lower body injuries, especially the pass rushers. Sometimes they can linger and have lingering effects. So that was kind of disappointing to see. But I think Thibodeaux's a guy that, when healthy, he's going to be a matchup nightmare for opposing tackles, especially in Don Wink Martindale's scheme that just brings relentless pressure from all angles. And you can move him around, stand him up, put his hand in the dirt, just get after the quarterback with him. I think it's going to be real exciting to watch. And I think that in Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeaux, the Giants got 2 really solid building block pieces in this draft. And they might have gotten a third in Wan'Dale Robinson, who had a really dynamic training camp. And there are a lot of people inside the league who are really high on him. Some have even compared him to Darren Sproles. So I think that the Giants have some nice young pieces. Again, I think that they're going to be more competitive for Brian Daboll this year, but I don't think they're going to win a lot more games. But I think that a catalyst to them turning that corner is going to be Kayvon Thibodeaux and Evan Neal from this class.
Matt, where can everybody find your stuff at?
Yeah, I'm all over. You can read me at heavy.com. I have a national column that comes out every Wednesday morning. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all the same username, at Matt Lombardo NFL, and on fun places like this on your show.
Thanks, Matt. Once again, I'm going to have you on. This was great conversation. I love how you have an NFC East background. It's perfect for this show, and I'll be getting on again soon. I'm just going to say that.
Sounds great, Jeff. Really enjoyed it. Congrats on the new show.
Oh, thank you, Matt. I appreciate it.